On today's episode, we'll talk about starting out in 8mm, street photography, the marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Twin Falls, Idaho, and of course, the benefits of having two operators of varying heights. Just a little bit of business before we start. There may be a curse word here or there in this episode, so please listen responsibly. As always, our website, theop.io, is up and chock full of tips, tricks, and gooey operator goodness. Make sure to check out The Breakdown, where the best operators in the biz explain shots they have done, The Musings, where we discuss everything from quick tips to larger concepts of storytelling, the answers, the images, and so much more. I may or I may not take a break or two during this episode, but I promise that none of them will be longer than 22 seconds. Finally, if you are enjoying the podcast, please follow us, write a review, share us with your parents, and talk us up around the water cooler with your friends. So grab a beverage, sit back, and enjoy the op. Thanks for listening.
Lock it up, nice and quiet, and let's roll.
Rolling. Victor 30 Echo, take 2.
Hey, Margaret. Hey, Mark.
And camera set. And action.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Op Podcast, the podcast where we talk about operating and the art of visual storytelling. My name is Dave Comides. I'm your host, and here again from Panavision Woodland Hills in their theater, because it sounds better than the bedroom in my house. I have a really, really great guest here today, David Mullen, ASC. He is a cinematographer, best known for, among other things, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Extant, Smash, United States of Terra, Big Love, Aquila and the Bee, just a couple of the things that he's done. He has 2 nominations for an Independent Spirit Award for the movies Twin Falls, Idaho and North Fork. 4 ASC nominations and 1 win for Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, 5 Emmy nominations and 2 wins for Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and a Dublin Film Critics Award for the movie The Love Witch, which apparently, as he told me, was a bunch of critics sitting in a pub and deciding which movie's the best one. So amazing work, and thank you for being here.
It's nice to be here.
So can you tell me about the David Mullen story? How'd you get to where you are?
I'm kind of a cinephile. I was in high school. I started getting into filmmaking, Super 8 filmmaking, and took it very seriously. And I spent about 10 years shooting my own Super 8 short films. Okay. I was in college and tried to get into the film school at UCLA after being a pre-med major originally.
Oh, wow.
But my pre-med grades weren't good enough to get into the UCLA Film School, so I ended up getting an English Lit degree at UCLA. But while I was at UCLA, I was shooting short films for people in the USC Film School, friends of mine that got into that school, and shooting my own short films. I had a Super 8 package, and I built my own dolly. I was doing all sorts of trick shots in Super 8 with macro photography and things. And eventually, I applied to Cal Arts for a master's degree in filmmaking when I was like 26. So I went to Cal Arts with a vague idea to be a director, but what happened was very quickly, the first class we had to take at Cal Arts was a Super 8 class. And while everyone else was struggling to shoot something in focus with their friends in a park, I turned in this black and white film noir Super 8 film that had macro photography and dolly moves and deep focus, sort of Orson Wellesian compositions and all these things. And Cal Arts is a very kind of experimental hippy-dippy school, and which was good for me because I was so opposite that it sort of forced me to explore alternate filmmaking and experimental films and things. But I taught myself filmmaking at this point by watching classic movies, Wells and Hitchcock and Kurosawa and stuff.
Is that Super 8 movie or 8mm movie available like online? Can you see it somewhere?
No. It's not.
That's too bad.
I projected it so many times that the perfs have torn out of the print, so it's not even transferable.
Oh, that's too bad.
I taught it. When I was at UCLA, I spent all my time at the Theater Arts Library reading books and magazines, and I'd read every issue of American Cinematographer going back to 1919 or so, and reread every issue from 1970 forward several times over. So I'd sort of taught myself cinematography through reading and then going out and shooting in Super 8 and playing with filters and stuff. But mainly my goal was always to make a Super 8 film that looked like a 16 millimeter film. And when I started shooting 16 millimeter, I wanted it to look like a 35 millimeter film. And I always wanted it to look professional, but I didn't know what that meant. I just would shoot and always ask myself, does this feel like a, quote, real movie?
Wow. Uh-huh.
Which is how I learned, basically. But once I got to Cal Arts, I was involved in a lot more experimental work, watching films on the history of experimental filmmaking, and that kind of opened my eyes to other ways of thinking about cinema and storytelling.
Cal Arts was like a 2-year program, or
it's a 3-year master's program.
And do you go? Are you in like a cinematography track there, or
no? I sort of created my own, because what happened was once they saw my short film that I applied with, everyone gets a mentor from a different professor, and they decided that my mentor should be Chris Malkiewicz, who's the cinematography professor.
Oh.
And I'd read his books years before I even went to Cal Arts, film lighting and cinematography.
Oh, I think we had those in school at NYU, actually.
Yeah, cinematography is one of the first textbooks that came out in the mid-'70s.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was all geared for his Cal Arts class, so it's a heavily oriented towards 16 millimeter from start to finish. And what happened at Cal Arts was he would give us a lecture and a pop quiz, and I kept getting 100% on all his pop quizzes. And so he just said, you're going to be the TA for this class. You clearly know the material already. So I was his TA for the lighting workshop and for the cinematography class for the 3 years I was at Cal Arts.
Wow.
And later on, he asked me to co-edit or to co-write his third edition of the cinematography.
Oh, that's
textbook.
right. I read that. That's amazing.
Yeah, in around 2003 or so.
That's an honor.
So that was fun. Although oddly enough, the chapters that needed the most revision were all non-cinematography related. They're all like sound recording, post-production. Those are the things that changed the most since I was at Cal Arts. The terms of lenses, cameras, film stocks, that aspect hadn't changed as much.
Wow.
So
it's funny because I actually sort of remember that book and remember there were parts like that I would sort of skip over and not read because I was interested in the cinematography part.
But I had to, I had to update everything, so I had to do a lot of calling all my friends who were sound recordists, saying, what are you guys using?
What do you actually use?
Yeah, so it was a good experience writing a textbook.
Yeah.
So I went to Cal Arts and ended up becoming a cinematographer at Cal Arts because I got asked to shoot everyone else's projects, and I never got around to finishing my own master thesis film. And so what happened was I went to the committee and I said, look, I've shot 23 master thesis films for other people who you've given degrees to. You should give me a degree as a cinematographer.
You mean you would have had to direct that
Yes,
one and you didn't have time? Yeah.
To get a master's degree,
Yeah.
You're supposed to have to do a thesis film.
Okay.
But I just ran out of time and money. I started a thesis film, but I just couldn't finish it. And they said, well, we don't have a cinematography program at Cal Arts, but they agreed to give me a master's in cinematography from Cal Arts, even though there is no such program at Cal Arts. So,
Wow.
Technically I have a MFA in filmmaking, but I didn't do a thesis film. So I got out of Cal Arts with 20 or so short films under my belt, mostly 16 millimeter, and one 35 millimeter short. And then I did a 35 millimeter feature the year after I graduated with a fellow student graduate. It was all unpaid work, donated film stocks and cameras and stuff with an Ultracam from Leonetti.
Oh my gosh, I remember that. That was a massive 35 millimeter camera, right? It was really big.
Yeah, and it was, we went through 5 bodies in the course of a 3-week feature. Eventually we had to call Panavision, and Panavision gave us a Panaflex for free to finish the movie.
Because the other ones were breaking down so much.
Yeah, well, I finally found an Ultracam that worked perfectly, and then they wanted it back.
Because it worked.
It worked. They said, that camera can be converted to 3-perf. We have a series coming up, and we need that body back. And I go, but it's the only one that's worked. I've gone through, that's my 5th body I've gone through.
But they needed to make some money. So,
so they gave me back the previous body that was scratching film.
Oh, jeez.
So I ended up calling Panavision, and they were very generous, and they said they would just give us the camera.
What was the name of that movie?
It was called River Bottom.
River Bottom.
Yeah, so we went to film festivals and things. And then I did another feature the year after, and this one was almost a $1 million budget, 35 millimeter. It was basically a Cal Arts student was trying to be a producer. He hooked up with a director who wanted to make a feature and was going to shoot it in Betacam, which actually was not normal back in 1992. There weren't many features shot in video,
Yeah.
broadcast video particularly. So they hired me, and then he suddenly got a producer with money, and it became like a $900,000 thriller. And he kept me, the line producer they hired said, well, now first thing you do is fire that DP because he only has one feature credit. But, I was totally prepared for that film. I storyboarded it for the director. And at the end, the line producer said I was wrong. She saw how well it turned out.
That's great.
So,
At least they copped to it in the end.
But then that led to several straight-to-video thrillers for producer non-union films. They were all sort of sold to German television and Lifetime Channel and stuff. And after shooting almost a dozen of those, I really wanted to shift the trajectory of my career. This is now about 8 years out of film school, and I hooked up with Michael and Mark Polish, who were also CalArts graduates. Michael was, but weren't in the film school when I was at CalArts. They were in the art school, but they wanted to get into filmmaking, and they hired me to shoot a short film because they asked another CalArts graduate who's shooting out there, and they got my name. I shot a short film, and then they got funding for this feature, Twin Falls, Idaho, which went to Sundance Film Festival and got a theatrical distribution.
Yeah.
So that got me an agent. It started me on a run of shooting indie films that were sort of film festival bound. So that was great. And the budgets for indie films at that time in the early 2000s were on the rise because Sundance was a big thing, and the studios all created these divisions to do independent films. Yep. But then it all kind of collapsed again once they stopped really making money. And in the mid-2000s, I got hired to shoot a season of Big Love, the second season of Big Love for HBO.
I think I may have worked with you there because I used to come and go there. I might have worked with you there once or twice. But.
Yeah, I remember Bob Odessa was the operator on that show, and George Billinger was our
George was, I think, the main
speed
operator
camera
on the show.
and steady operator.
And I used to do Splinter Units or something like
Right.
that. But yeah, it was a good-looking show.
Yeah, thank
Was
you.
it a big mental jump going from like sort of low-budget indie to? I mean, that was Showtime, HBO,
HBO,
like a big HBO show.
Well, it was interesting. They wanted a new DP for the second season, co-DP, and but they said we don't want a television DP. I guess HBO had some, or the showrunners just were prejudiced against regular network television look. They wanted a feature look, and so they interviewed me. But they said, "Now, can you handle though 7, 8, 10 pages of script a day?" And I was like, "That's the standard indie schedule." You know? So,
exactly.
In fact, what I learned doing television is that it's the number of pages are similar to independent films, but they spend more money to be faster. You know, they spend the money in television for pre-rigging and, scouting and wrap crews and all the things so that they can hit the ground running.
Sure.
Where I go off on an indie film and suddenly it's 2 hours before I can get a shot off because I'm still running bandit cable from the generator because they wouldn't pay for the electric crew to have a pre-call or something like that.
So this was actually much easier, it sounds like.
In some ways, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially on stage. Stage was pre-lit, and so they would actually do a run through the shots the night before. Then the morning before call, they would bring in the actors for rehearsal.
Oh.
And at call time, they would bring the crew in to watch the rehearsal, and the actors go off to hair and makeup, and they expected within half an hour or so to be shooting the first setup.
It's so funny that you say that because John Lindley and I have suggested this for years, that you bring the crew in at 8 o'clock for a call time, and then the crew sits around for 45 minutes while they rehearse. Why don't they rehearse first and then just hit the ground running? So they actually did that, and it worked well. I've never heard of a show actually doing it. So.
Yeah, part of the problem is a lot of cast, especially if it's a period show, are already in hair and makeup for an hour or two before call. So bringing them in even earlier for rehearsals is problematic with the turnarounds and stuff. But it is a good idea. I also I read the story that Kurosawa developed a system where he would rehearse the first 2 days of the week and then shoot the last 3 days of the week.
Really?
And when he was hired to do Tora for Fox, one bone of contention is they refused to let him direct like that, and that's one reason he got out of that production.
Wow. I
but
didn't know he was supposed to direct that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow.
The Japanese section.
Yeah. Did he do all of his movies that way?
I don't think he started out that way, but he was a former AD.
Yeah.
In Japan, they trained directors first as ADs, but an AD in that system back in the 40s and 50s, that an assistant director really learned to direct. They went out and shot second unit.
Oh.
They did a lot of script work and work with the director to learn how to direct, and then they would get a shot at directing eventually. So he was trained as an AD first and then a director, but he developed this system of rehearsals before he would shoot, a little like Sidney Lumet, who seriously rehearses his films like a play before they start shooting. But
Yeah.
Kurosawa would do these rehearsals in the first part of the week and then shoot the second part of the week. And then he would do very few takes once he started shooting, a little like Lumet, because they had rehearsed it.
They had rehearsed it so much. Do you know Tommy Shalami?
I've heard of him.
Yeah, so Tommy's a friend of mine, and I interviewed him for this show. And he did a show called Sports Night that Aaron Sorkin wrote. And it basically was sort of a single-camera sitcom, 2 cameras, whatever, but there was Steadicam. It was really unlike anything they'd done before. And they were saying, we don't care how you shoot it, but it has to be done in 2 days because of the sitcom. They're on 2 days somewhere else, and the crew comes over. And they were trying to figure out how to do it. So what they ended up doing was he and Aaron and the actors would rehearse for 3 days and get everything figured out, and with the DP and Peter Smokler. And then on Thursday and Friday, they would shoot 2 12-hour days, and they would do the entire show because it was all dialed in, and that's how they did it. So it's very similar to that. I'll mention to him that he pulled that off of Kurosawa. He'll like that.
Yeah.
But it's the only time I've heard of that. But it makes perfect sense, right? Yeah.
So let's go back to my timeline. So I got into television for HBO in the mid-2000s, doing the second season of Big Love, and then I was about to go on to the third season when the writers' strike happened.
The last writers' strike.
And it lasted. It started in November 1st, and I think it went through the early spring.
Yeah.
So I went back into features. I did Jennifer's Body for Fox, with Karen Kusama directing up in Vancouver, and then when that was over, HBO was back into production with Big Love, but I was shooting 2 Polish Brothers movies back to back that summer, so I couldn't go back to Big Love. But as soon as the summer ended, the writer of Jennifer's Body, Diablo Cody, was also producing a pilot for United States of Terror at the same time. So that fall, United States of Terror went to production, and they interviewed me for that, and that was with DreamWorks. And so I ended up shooting 3 seasons of United States of Terror for Showtime.
Mm-hmm.
But it put me in an odd situation where on the United States of Terror, I'd brought my crew from my indie films over. But on Big Love, the crew was from first season, Jim Glennon, who was the main DP, had brought in. So every year I'd get this call from HBO or from the Big Love people saying, would you like to come back for the next season? And I was like, well, I can go back to HBO and use their crew, or I can stay on United States of Terror and keep my crew working. So I stuck with United States of Terror partly just for the sake of my crew.
Yeah. And so that was obviously, you got into DreamWorks that way.
Right. And then after United States of Terror was Smash and Extant. And I also started shooting pilots around that time. I did the pilot for The Good Wife, and
I didn't know that.
Chicago Code, and Extant. I did the pilot as well, and Designated Survivor. So I was doing pilots for a while, and then after Extant, I had sort of a slow period again. I went back into indie films. I did The Love Witch and another film for Michael Polish called 90 Minutes in Heaven out in Atlanta.
So how many movies have you done with them?
I think I've done about 6 or 7 features. And then after that sort of year back in indie film world, I did the Designated Survivor pilot that spring, and then I got asked to come and do second unit on Westworld. That's late spring by Jeff Jur, who was one of the DPs shooting the second half. First season was shut down for 5 months for writing reasons. So they did the pilot, then they shut down for months to write the season. They shot 5 episodes of the first season, and then they shut down for 5 months came back to shoot the second half of the first season. I shot the last shot that Ed Harris did, and in the first season, and I said, "You're wrapped, Ed." He goes, "I've been on the show for 2 years now." It's like he couldn't believe it that he was actually wrapped on the first season.
I've heard that was a tough show overall, like
Yeah.
on a lot of levels.
So I did a month on of that, mostly just second unit pickups and reshoots, because they were doing a lot of pickup shooting from the previous 5 episodes, which is why Jeff Jurt told them they needed a third DP, because he and David Franco were shooting the final 3 episodes, and it was too much to do that and do bits of reshoots of the other previous 5 episodes.
Gotcha.
So I did that work, and then that summer I interviewed for the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel pilot, which started around Labor Day on prep. So that fall I shot the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel pilot, 2016, and then did the TV series Get Shorty right after that. As soon as I wrapped Get Shorty, I started season 1 of Maisel, and as soon as I wrapped that, I did season 2 of Westworld.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought it was just going to be a month of second unit work on there. They already started shooting in June, and I was done with Maisel at Labor Day again in September, when they got a call saying, "Would you like to come on Westworld?" And I thought, okay, I'll do more pickup shots in second unit and stuff. I was on season 2 for 5 months, and they gave me a whole episode to shoot, but it was 5 months mostly of shooting individual scenes. Like,
oh wow,
we need to reshoot this scene in the control room. We need to go out and at one point, they needed to spend a couple weeks in Colorado or Utah shooting their scenes away from L.A.
Yeah.
And at first, they offered that to me to go shoot, but I didn't want to leave L.A., and so I shot in Los Angeles on the stages while they were shooting in Colorado and Utah.
Wow.
So, and then I went back to season 2 of Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And I haven't done anything but Maisel since season 2, basically.
Yeah. Well, with COVID and everything else, right?
Well, COVID hit between seasons 3 and 4.
Yeah.
And then I went back to 4. 4 was really our COVID season, where, during all the lockdowns and all the testing and all that stuff. So.
Crazy. It's kind of amazing to think that that's theoretically behind us, hopefully behind us.
Yeah.
So when you went in to look for Maisel, to talk about Maisel and read the script, did you realize it was going to be as visually, I don't know what the word is, impressive, or I don't know, as it became? Not
when I interviewed for it. I mean, I knew it was a period show set in New York in 1959, which is a beautiful time to shoot a New York story, and shot in Manhattan for Manhattan. So I knew that aspect was going to be interesting visually, but I didn't really know how talented our production designer and our costume designer and our cast were going to be. It just elevated everything. So once I got into New York to prep and I started seeing the designs and the historical research that Bill Groom was doing for the show, and the sketches that Donna Zarkowska was doing for the costumes, it was just on a different level, and so it was exciting to do the pilot. It wasn't guaranteed it would get picked up either. There was, I think, 3 months between the pilot and the actual season 1. So we did the pilot, and then I left, but I was very happy that it immediately got picked up as soon as they showed the pilot, I think.
So, I mean, anybody who's seen Maisel knows that it's sort of known for so many things, all the things that you just mentioned, by the way, and exceptional acting. I actually worked with Rachel on Manhattan, and I remember, like, nobody knew who she was, and we were all sort of like, who is this woman? She's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But it obviously became known for these just massive single one-er shots.
Yeah, and
Steadicam and crane and drone and Ronin and whatever, or Movi.
Yeah, that escalated very quickly. I did the pilot, and it's because it was a pilot, we had a lot of prep, unlike the series. And Amy Sherman Palladino had just warned me that there was one big dialogue scene that she wanted to play in one moving Steadicam shot, and started in the living room when Midge tells her parents that Joel has left her, and the father gets upset and goes into his den, and she chases him into the den, and the camera chases them in the den, and they spin 45 degrees into a 50-50, and then they we back up with them into the foyer, and then the mother crosses in, and we see down the hall with the mother, and then they end up walking back into the living room again. And Amy, we did this on stage with the space taped out, and we went to the location several times, and she kept telling me this has all got to be one shot, and I didn't think it was going to be too difficult, other than the fact this is a location. We didn't build these sets until we went to series, and my fear was every time we'd back into the next room, I'd see any lighting in the ceiling of the first room. So my scouting was constantly just walking backwards with like an Artemis on and a still camera, and just wondering at what point does the door frame hide the ceiling. And we ended up using these LED blanket lights, Source Maker blanket lights, rigged to the ceiling, very tight in order to get them out of frame.
Yeah.
But that solved that issue. But it was just funny that she was so concerned that I knew this was all going to be one shot, but then when I came back for that was episode 1 technically. So they shot 2 and 3 without me. I came back for episode 4, and she came up with this elaborate Steadicam shot that involved morphing from the past to the present, where we hide the transition in time. It's a montage that starts the episode where Midge is moving out of her apartment, and they're playing "Happy Days" by Barbra Streisand.
Yeah.
And it culminates. We have a bunch of match move shots where we cut back and forth between the day she moved her happy days with Joel moving in, and then the day of moving out of the apartment. And the last segment is a New Year's Eve party flashback where she designed a shot that should have been a motion control, except what she designed was a figure 9 spiral move, which is no way to do on track. The camera starts in the dining room, goes past partygoers up to Midge and Joel in the living room, spins 2 times around them in 360, and the second time it spins around Midge, she's by herself for a moment, and it pulls away and reveals her all alone in the daytime in the empty apartment, back in the present. And and you don't know exactly when it transitioned, and that was Amy kept saying is, I don't want to see the transition. I don't want to see a cut.
I don't want to see a wipe, or
I don't want to see a wipe
whatever.
or anything. I just want it to magically go from past to present. And I talked a lot to our visual effects person, Leslie Foster Robson, about this, and I said, well, this sounds like a morph to me. You're morphing from one shot to another with a perfect match move. So we talked about all the problems that's going to create. I told Amy, look, if we morph Rachel, then the clothing she wears in the past is going to morph into the clothing she wears in the present.
Yeah.
Her hairstyle is going to morph.
Sure.
Her face might shift.
It won't be seamless. I mean,
and Amy said, no, I don't want to see that.
Yeah.
I don't want to see anything change. So I said, well, then the moment that we transition, not only, and also anyone in the room is going to disappear magically. And she goes, I don't want to see that. So I said that when we spin 360 around her, the moment you do that transition has to be the moment the wall is behind her head. And on that wall can't be anything that's not going to be moved out of the empty room.
Yeah.
So that wall has to be like the fireplace with nothing on the mantle, nothing there, so that we don't see furniture magically disappear. And Donna had to redesign the party dress so it was similar to the moving day outfit, so you didn't see sleeves disappear on her arms. And we had Rachel turn her back to camera the moment we spun so that we would be morphing on the back of her head and not her front. So we talked all that through, and then the issue became, how do we match move these 2 shots? And what we ended up doing was, and Leslie said, art department's going to come in and redress the room. We have to do the 2 halves on the same day. If they're not motion control, we have to do the 2 halves of the shot on the same day. So art department has to change the whole apartment over from the lived-in look to the empty look.
The reason being just so Jim McConkey, the
could memorize the shot,
could redo the shot.
And Leslie was afraid that if too much time passed, then things would change that we can't account for. So basically, we did that party shot before lunch. Then during lunch, art department came in and emptied out the apartment. We came back and set it up for the day empty room shot. And what Jim did was played the previous Steadicam shot on his monitor as a transparency, and he would do some rehearsals where he would start to move. He'd have to overlap it a little bit and try to line up every lampshade and
Oh my
and
gosh.
door jamb and mantle on the fireplace, all the architecture, trying to get the height of his lens, the angle and everything. And he would rotate around Rachel a few times, trying to line up all the elements in the room in the ghost image until he felt he was
I can't even
recreating
imagine that,
himself.
because the thing is, it's not that you just have to hit it for a frame. You've got to hit it for however many
circling.
frames that morph
Yeah.
is, which is significant.
Yeah.
That's
And I'm knowing that Leslie would have to fix some of this.
of course.
We normally shoot 3.2K ProRes, but in this case, I framed for a crop to 2.8K ProRes so that Leslie would have more room to
play around with? Wow.
to reframe and stuff.
So, was there a way to determine if you had it once you'd shot it? Were you playing them over each other after the
Yeah,
takes?
we did some
Yeah.
dissolved overlapping. The playback person showed it, but it was very rough still. It was
Sure.
2 Steadicam moves.
Yeah. That's an
But it was
incredible
close
amount
enough
of control.
that Leslie felt she could work with it, and she did have to do a lot of morphing and shifting elements of the fireplace mantle and things to get it all to work right. But it's very seamless, and
It's
what
incredible.
she did at the end there. But that was almost the first shot I came back to after being away from the pilot.
So that set the bar for what you were in for
Yeah,
now?
and then at the second half of that episode is a montage of Midge and Susie going out to various comedy clubs. It's like she takes Midge out to all the clubs to get her a sense of what stand-ups are doing, and it culminates with them at the Copacabana, which we created in a kind of high school gym-ish space. We turned into the dance floor of the Copacabana, and we called it the reverse Goodfellas shot because it starts out in the club and ends up in the kitchen.
This is the one that starts with the close-up of a drummer?
Yeah.
And pulls back.
And this was our first Technocrane disconnect Moby magnetic
So was this
release.
Larry McConkey and Jimmy McConkey?
Yeah. Larry had told us he had built a magnetic release for a Moby. So we start on the drummer, we Technocrane back over the dancers, we disconnect, and then we walk the Moby through the tables and chairs with the following a waiter into the restaurant, and then they come up the stairs and talk, and then we end up looking back.
So Larry's walking around with it, and Jimmy is working the wheels, I would assume, remotely?
Yes,
Yeah. That's I mean, it's an incredible shot.
Yeah, it was fun. And this was the first also moment where Amy decided in the future she needed to have a certain number of dancers play extras, because we did a number of takes, not because of Larry or Jim, but because the shot was so elaborate that Larry and Jim wanted the motions to be motivated by crosses of extras. So
Of course.
as soon as we get to this table, a waiter breaks frame and takes us back over the dancers. As soon as we see the dancers for one beat, a waiter crosses and takes us back to the kitchen door.
Yeah.
But we kept doing take after take where the waiter would come in a step late, or the next waiter would come in a step too early. And
So you're saying the extras, meaning the waiters would the normal extras, not the dancers, would be
the-
professional dancers because they know the timing and
well,
the
not,
cadence.
they
and-
weren't in this case, but
Yeah.
after we did that scene,
Moving
Amy
forward.
was like, I want dancers to play extras because the timing has got to be so critical for some of these crosses and stuff. So every time we have a crowd scene afterwards, the AD would always ask Amy, do you need any dancers, and how many dancers do you need? So when we were going through a department store, there's always 3 or 4 dancers playing shoppers so that they would cross the steady
The hero crosses or whatever.
Yeah, just at the right moment.
That's amazing.
Because
That's
it's
so
all
smart.
about this sort of choreography.
And she was a dancer, right?
Yeah.
Was it? Okay, so she
Yeah.
comes from that. So it sounds like she's not a technical person, not in a bad way, and she just says, "This is what I want. You go figure out how to make it happen."
Yeah, and we were always pushing the limits of what the technology can do, because I keep having a reminder that ultimately we're running up against Newtonian physics. Because cameras have mass, and you get them up as fast as she wants them to go, then they don't want to stop on a dime. They don't want to accelerate
Yep.
from 0 to 60. It's very hard to find equipment that does this kind of thing, and she's always pushing us. She feels Technocranes are too slow, drones aren't flexible enough. Nothing quite does what she needs it to do, and we're always pushing the limits. I remember even on the pilot, which I didn't know yet, her style, we had establishing shots of Midge walking into her apartment, and I said, would you like a crane there? And she goes, sure, we'll get a crane. I just thought it might make the shot more interesting. And Panavision had some older, non-stabilized crane for a bargain, basically. They said, and I said, is it stable enough? Oh, I've never had anyone complain about this, right? We get out there on the street, and Amy is swinging that thing around as fast as she can. She's shoveling full speed, and it's just shaking and bouncing, and I'm sitting there kicking the curb because I got talked into this, but I didn't know idea she was going to push it that hard, basically. So I learned my lesson on the pilot.
Well, what Jim told me was that she would describe shots and then she'll just throw her hands up in the air as if the camera's flying like a bird. And he always said, oh, God, now I know what that means. And we got to figure out how to do that. But that's kind of amazing because it sounds like it's sort of the perfect storm of she just has this vision and is unencumbered by the physics, and you're clearly not afraid to figure out, okay, how do we light this? You look at it as a challenge as opposed to, oh my gosh, this is going to be too hard. And then you've got Larry and Jimmy, or Jimmy and Larry, who are sort of the mad scientists of how do we make this move through space.
Them and Charlie Sharon, my key grip.
Sure.
And my dolly grip Jake. And Anthony Capello, my first AC.
Anthony Capello, I know
You
him
need
well.
all those people working together to solve these problems.
That's fantastic. And is it a constant group effort of just like how do we make this work?
Yeah, I mean, we'll bounce ideas. They often will say, "Well, this is how we think it should be done," and then I'll say, "Well, there's issues with that approach, which is going to be X, Y, and Z," and then Charlie Sharon, I'll throw his 2 cents in about maybe it should be done this way, and then Jim and Larry will say, "No, they don't." So there's never one perfect solution. There's always a solution that has pros and cons, and you're going to run into certain limits with doing it on a Steadicam versus a Movi, or a Movi is going to have issues that a Steadicam's not going to have. A step off of a crane is going to do some things that are better than a disconnect from a Movi, but you just weigh all the pros and cons and what's the best way to get this shot, and we'll swap it up. A good example is the season 3 opener, which is the oneer at the USO number, where we start out in an airfield.
Oh yeah.
And we see a Jeep driving through the airfield, and we come upon a one-page dialogue scene of Midge and Susie in the back of the Jeep talking, and the Jeep pulls into the front of the hangar, and they get out, and the camera backs up with them and backs up with Midge onto a stage where we see 800, 900 soldiers in the frame, and she comes down the other side of the stage and then meets Susie again, and they get into a Jeep and it drives off, and it's all one shot.
Yeah.
And luckily this was a first episode of the season shot, so we had an extra amount of prep for it than we normally would.
Sure.
And it was clear just the way it was written, it was a oneer. It didn't say oneer in the script, but you can sense now when you read something Amy's written that it flows without a cut. There's no reason to cut. And so the question is always, would you like not to cut? Do you want to make this a oneer? And this one was definitely always in her head a oneer. But the question was, how do you cover the dialogue in the moving Jeep? How do you then walk the camera onto a stage and down a stage?
Because I remember that shot. It starts sort of wide, and then it almost goes into. It seems like it goes into the Jeep, into a conventional over-the-shoulder or a 2-shot or something.
Yeah,
it's wild.
So we talked about, and I have the whole problem of lighting, because how do I light the interior of a and see the entire hangar, but start outside in full sunlight? And I think Jim had suggested, why don't we put a Movi mount onto the Jeep and cover them, and then disconnect And I said, well, the 2 problems with that idea is, one is the shot starts out in the tight 2-shot, so I get no wide shot first.
Yep.
The other problem is the moment you disconnect and walk backwards, that rig is visible on the Jeep, so visual effects will paint it out. But if it crosses the bodies of the lead actors, the visual effects there, that's not going to work. I can't CG parts of their body back in. So I felt a rig on the Jeep was a bad idea. So then the question was, do we cover the driving section with like a Russian arm, and would we disconnect a Movi off a Russian arm, which I've never done before, but in theory it's doable. But then as soon as we disconnect, the Russian arm car has to get out of the shot because we start backing up with the Movi. So that's when Charlie Sharon said, why don't we get a Grip Tricks and get 2 precision stunt drivers, and essentially the Jeep driver and the Grip Tricks driver will basically start wide of each other and then drive up to each other, drive in sync within 4 inches. The 2 vehicles are perfectly in sync for, I was nervous because the year before we had done a Russian arm dialogue scene in a moving car in the Catskills. And we had a very hard time on a windy mountain road maintaining a raking two shot.
Oh, it's almost impossible.
Because as soon as one car slows down or speeds up, and partly it's because the actor's driving the picture car, but we would be floating back and forth through the dialogue section.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that for this scene, but in this case, our Jeep driver could be a stunt driver, so it ended up being a very precise.
Because that shot is locked on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
for a page of dialogue, it's a locked raking two shot, and then the grip trick pulls slightly ahead to loosen up as they get out, and then as soon as the camera disconnects or Jim steps off the Steadicam, the grip trick drives into a tent. I asked art department to give me a army tent in the middle of the hangar that the grip tricks could drive into and hide. So when the Jim backs up, and we had planned in rehearsal that Jim couldn't actually walk up the steps that Midge walks up because it's too steep. He wanted a ramp next to the staircase. We built a wooden ramp on both sides of the stage for Jim to walk backwards up. The first ramp you don't see, but then as you come down the second part, it turns into a dialogue scene at the base of the steps where you would see the wooden ramp, so we had to make that on wheels. So as soon as Jim comes down the second ramp, and it's still off camera, it gets rolled out of the way, so as Jim swings back left, it's not there. But poor Alex Borstein, who got left behind at the Jeep at the start of the shot, has to run behind the stage and catch up with everyone and come into frame just as, and to dodge this ramp that's getting rolled out of the shot, she's getting around that.
Oh my gosh.
And then meeting the Steadicam. Basically.
I mean, the level of, and you've got all the extras, and you've got, I mean.
Yeah, and I've gone from almost an F11 to an F2 by the end of this shot. I didn't want to do that on the lens originally because I didn't want the big depth of field shift.
Yeah.
But it's very slow. But I couldn't get a hold of the Cinefade device, which is a type of, LCD variable ND thing.
Yeah.
There's only one in the United States at the time or something, and I couldn't get it. So I tried doing it with a variable ND which is two rotating polarizers on a Preston. But I did a test back at Steiner where I put the camera in the soundstage and I panned back and forth from the full sun to the full shade, and I could not do an in-camera exposure change with variable NDs that didn't look very obvious.
It's too abrupt.
Yeah, as soon as you started to rotate them, you would see, an exposure change.
Yep.
I couldn't feather it the way I could with a f-stop, so I gave up on. I didn't want to screw up a big oneer like this with 900 extras and Jeeps and moving vehicles, and the problem being me and my stop pull. So
what was the answer?
So I went back to an f-stop change,
Yeah.
and I did it on the Iris. But
I'll say I don't remember anything, thinking anything, because there's so much going on as well.
And we did a similar shot later in season 3 when we got to Miami. We did our first double Technocrane Movi disconnect, and this was one where we were scouting the lobby of the Fontainebleau Hotel, and we had first scouted the front of the lobby, and there were fountains in front of the Fontainebleau, and I said it would be nice to fly over the fountains like on a Technocrane as an establishing shot. And Amy said, yeah, that's great. And we'll fly over the fountains, and the Jeep will pull up, the taxis will pull up, and they'll get out. And then we were scouting the lobby, and I said to Amy, I bet you would like us not to cut. You would like to do the front and the interior in one shot. And she goes, can you do that? I go, well, we'd planned a Technocrane move in the lobby to show it off. I said, well, we'll have to pay for 2 Technocranes because we already just marked one for the front of the building. And so that's what we did. We did 2 Technocranes, and we connected the second one. We flew around the lobby, came down, and then on the shooting day, she wanted to take it even further, and it didn't work. We basically, the idea was we'd disconnect outside. We'd follow Midge and Susie up the steps. We'd follow Midge into the lobby. We'd connect to the second Technocrane, rise up, see the whole lobby from high up, then float back down and chase Midge over to the counter. And when she got to the counter, we'd be on the check-in desk area. On the day, Amy said, can we keep going? Can you fly over the countertop, spin around, and look back and land on Midge so we're not cutting to Midge, but we're on Midge's for our first line of dialogue? And we tried to do it, but that required handing the movie over the countertop to our B operator. And the trouble is that the movie has grips on the side for the guy holding it, but there's no grip for a second person to grab it from the first person.
Yeah.
And the counter was pretty wide, so our B operator had to lean way over the countertop and try to grab the movie off of Larry's hands.
And you probably saw a hiccup or something.
Yeah, it
as
was always a
went.
little dip at
Yeah.
that moment,
Yeah.
trying to one-hand that whole
Yeah, because for
camera.
anybody who's listening who doesn't know, when it comes off of a crane, it's hanging from the top usually. It's underslung, so you grab it from the side and click it off of there, and then when you put it back onto a crane, you put it back up. But to hand from one person to another, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, we had not. If we had known in advance and prep that we were going to do this, there was a solution, which is that countertop was built by art department, and I could have had them build a swing-away door or something to walk
You could just
continuously
walk
through it.
Yeah.
But we didn't know that until the day of shooting. So we
That's
did do the handoff, but it didn't look great, and Amy ended up just cutting before that
Yeah.
handoff to the reverse angles.
So you and Jim must work, I mean, completely in tandem on this to make sure, because it sounds like these kind of things could get very out of control very quickly if you're
Yeah.
not both heavily involved.
Yeah, one issue we run into is that Jim and Larry would love to use the ARRI remote focus and iris control unit, but these long moves that go from inside to outside, it just doesn't have the broadcasting power, the transmission power to hold a signal. And so we tried using that unit first few takes, and I kept losing my iris signal. The moment I was doing my big iris change from inside to outside was the moment I kept losing signal.
Because you're so physically far away
Yeah.
from it, you're saying. Oh,
and
I see what you're
I'm
saying.
at the monitor judging the timing, and I didn't want to have to do the iris pull by following the camera around.
Yeah.
I wanted to do it by what was on the screen at the time. So we end up switching back to a Preston, which is a little more weight
Yeah.
because you have to put an external
Yep.
stuff on there.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's just, and as you know, there's the reason the transmission power output of the ARRI unit is lower is because of EU laws with electronic transmission.
Yep. What they're allowed to get away with,
Yeah.
which maybe is better for us in the long run, but that's
Right,
another
healthier
story.
probably, but we do these long moves that go through cement walls and all these things, and it's just very hard
Yeah.
to maintain a signal. So
That's fascinating. So when you're working with on something like this, with an operator like Jim, I mean, you've got two operators sort of some of the time, but Jim's there all the time. How does it happen when she or another director want to, move on to the next thing or whatever, and do they come to you? Do they come to Jim? Is it a process that works one way versus the other? Because obviously he's got to consider your lighting when they say, and now could we keep on going here and could we keep on going here? Like, how does that process work? Or is
I think we all powwow on it, and everyone has,
Yeah.
this is the solution. And then I'll say, well, lighting-wise, I need more time, or Leslie might have to paint out a unit now
Yeah.
that I have to rig in the shot that I hadn't planned on, things like that. We occasionally had that happen. We changed a shot on the day, and now something I've rigged has to be removed. In the Fontainebleau, we had a sequence that was supposed to be a 360 on a staircase. As Midge is going down a staircase, the camera's going up the staircase. It first was on again a Technocrane disconnect the movie on the staircase, and then goes up to Midge at the top. She comes at us, and we circle around her as she's going down. So we're doing a kind of spiral move heading down a staircase with her, which is very difficult because the camera's having to run upstairs faster than her and then
Yep.
downstairs faster than her. So it's running at twice the speed of her walk. Amy wanted to do it. I didn't think it would be the most graceful shot because of this. I know in your head you're imagining this camera just floating around someone, but in reality someone is running up and down stairs in a circle around
the physics
somebody.
are a little different.
Yeah, but we ended up nixing the shot not because of the move, but because Amy realized that it was showing how we didn't have enough extras for the lobby. We were seeing the whole lobby in this big circular move, and even with, I think we had like 150 extras, the Fontaine lobby is huge, and it was clearly looked, semi-empty once we spun around so many times. So she simplified the shot, but once she did that, this was our last shot at the Fontainebleau before we left the location in midday to our next location, and they wanted to open up the lobby to everyone within like half an hour.
Oh, wow.
And we still had this shot to finish. And once we changed it, I said, well, now this sky panel that's in the ceiling is now visible. I can drive the scissor lift in and get it off of there. And they said, no, we don't have time. We have to be out in half an hour and moving on to the next location. So I had to call visual effects. Say, look, I'm leaving a light in the ceiling.
You got to take care of it for me.
Yeah, I try not to be one of those DPs that does that. There are some who just light a set and leave it to visual effects to clean up after them. I'm kind of old-fashioned about that. I'd like to make it work in the shot without a trick like visual effects painting something out, but sometimes it is the most practical, efficient way to do it, so I will warn them and call them and clear it with them.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And my reasoning is actually more so, well, there's two reasons. One is I'm always afraid that someone's not going to catch it, or they're going to forget it, or they're going to run out of time, and then suddenly there's a reflection of something which is makes me look like I'm not doing my job. And then the other part of it is my wife is a visual effects artist, and she'll actually spend time, taking a crew out of a window on a car or something like that, which they knew about. And she'll come in and she'll go, why don't they just move them? like, I don't know. It wasn't my show. I'd move them, but some people don't. So I totally get it. Going back to a larger sort of view of things, what do you expect from your A camera operator? Like, what do you look for in an A camera operator? Maybe not Maisel is a very specific situation, but just in general.
Well, I look for someone who will interact well with the actors, because they're probably the first line of communication during a shot with the actors. And so I need someone who actually will get along with the cast and be discreet enough in terms of dealing with emotional scenes and how they talk to the actors, not make it overly technical for the actors, in a sense, and protect them to some degree too. So I need someone who's sensitive to performance and has a personality I feel is not going to make it about them. Sometimes you interview an operator and they're so full of energy and bluster that maybe they're like the best operator in the world, but you kind of worry about the little intimate dialogue scene in a bedroom you're going to do, and you're thinking, is this the right mix of personality types? If you're doing a more action movie, let's say, where it's a lot of stunts and chases and running around and a sort of a cops and robber kind of thing, you think, well, it's not going to be a lot of sensitive dialogue scenes, so it's more about the physicality of the move, and so a certain operator maybe is suited for that. But then if you're doing something that's quiet and calm and it's just about these little moments, you want to find an operator that's going to be sensitive to that. And it's hard to judge in an interview. I remember shooting out of town, and I won't say which city, but I asked who are your best Steadicam operators, because I needed an A Steadicam person. They said, oh, there's two great guys here. One guy's really big and loud, one guy's really small and quiet. And I said, I'll take the small and quiet guy, because I'm small and quiet, so I just would feel more comfortable with that sort of operator to some degree. But it just depends. I remember Roman Polanski once said that he only hired short operators because he was a short person, and he wanted someone who saw the world the way he sees the world. And it's sort of true in a weird way. I did a show once where I, by just coincidence, had a very tall A operator and a very short B operator, and we ended up doing a lot of handheld work, and it was great because when you have actors of different height, I could put the taller actor over the shoulder of the taller foreground person, and the short operator with the handheld camera over the shoulder of the shorter person.
At 6'4", I've done that where I've gone, nope, let's get the B operator in here. This is his shot or her shot, because it's going to be a better shot from that.
Not that I don't interview with the idea of height, but I do. It is a funny thing when it works out that there's some use to actually having a B operator that's very physically different than the A operator.
There's no question about that.
It's kind of a strange thing, but that I look for someone who's going to be sensitive to performance and see how I like to work. I want the operator's input and involvement with the director, but I also don't want to be having to play catch up. I've been on some shows where the operator and the director come up with shots without my input and then bring it to me after the fact, and then I'm like, well, but you haven't thought about this or the time of day issue or
Sure.
this or that, and I want to be involved in these sort of discussions.
So in that situation, if a director comes to an operator and says, "Hey, I got this great idea," is the best thing for the operator to do to go, "Yeah, let's get David in on this, just so make sure that we're not going down a road."
But no, it does on TV. It does happen quite a bit because I'm alternating episodes.
fast, yeah.
So the operator is on set while I'm in prep on the next episode, and so a director may come to that operator who happens to be visiting the set or is actually directing 2 episodes in a row or something,
Yeah.
and talk to the operator without me there. And I understand that. I just want to be brought in as early as possible, and I don't want to. That I understand more, that we're all in different places. But once we're on the set together, I'd like us all to be on the same discussion
Yep.
at the same time,
Yeah.
rather than me solving problems they're creating, because it's a time issue as well. You may have, once you hear what they're planning, you may say, well, if you change it this way, it'll save us another half hour in lighting time. What you're describing will add 40 minutes of lighting time and things like that. So, and lighting is very important to me. It's something I enjoy a lot about cinematography, is the lighting aspect of it.
Well-
So it's something I don't expect the operators to think about lighting. I just I just keep it in mind, and that's sort of the challenge on Maisel, is that they still want the cast to look good. So no matter what the camera does and how it flies around, we have to land on someone in somewhat attractive light. Now, luckily, we don't go into chokers or anything like that. I'm not going, on a 24 mil master and ending up in a tight close-up.
Yeah.
So we're like waist up is our close-up, but they still have to look good. So I have to think about.
But I
where
was going to say,
is
the thing that always amazes me about Maisel is these shots just see the entire world. It seems like, obviously it doesn't, because you wouldn't have lights anywhere, but it just seems that way. And yet it still is a beautiful looking show. It's incredible. So do you just look at that as you like the challenge of, how am I going to possibly get some light in here, and where am I going to put
Well,
it?
I like it if I pull it off. If I feel like I didn't pull it off or compromise the
Sure.
lighting, it can be frustrating that I couldn't get it perfect. We do rehearsals with the Artemis Pro. We record the rehearsal so that I can play the take, the rehearsal take, the blocking rehearsal,
Yeah.
on the back of the iPad, and say, oh, this is how much ceiling you see. And I bring in the gym and I say, how critical is this? I mean, is there any chance you're going to float a little higher or see a little more to the right? Can you keep that? It's out in this take, but can you keep it out on every take? Because
Yeah.
I'm going to put a light right there, and usually he'll tell me whether it's doable or not.
Whether you can hit that frame or
Yeah.
not. Yeah, sure.
And that's where the light goes. I do a lot of handheld lighting. I have electrics with the battery packs and light mats hiding around corners, stepping in and then ducking behind furniture
Yeah.
after the actors have passed. Things like that. There's all sorts of gymnastics sometimes. Where I get hurt sometimes is outdoor shooting, where you need to shoot a certain time of day for it to look right, and because of the mechanics of the shot and what goes wrong, you end up at the wrong time of day shooting the shot.
Yeah.
And then there's nothing I can do about it. We had this whole elaborate above water swimming pool sequence involving water ballet that opened up
I remember that.
the
Yeah.
second Miami episode. And basically the shot starts out on a water ballet person. She dives in the pool, and the camera that dives in the pool with her sees the ballet underwater, then rises up and looks straight overhead on the pool, and then floats back down on the other side of the pool to Midge in the foreground. She gets up, and then it swings back around to the end of the pool and back to the front section, the straight-on angle, as Midge crosses the ballet people and kicks the beach ball at them. So, if the shot's fine, but it's not perfect. One problem was that we were supposed to shoot it at 9, 10 in the morning, and I would have had a nice side light from the sun rising over the ocean. But later that day, the next day, we were going to silk the whole pool, so we planned to bring 4 scissor lifts in to run cable across the 4 corners of the pool. Mm-hmm. And the morning of, the scissor lift operators drove in and their scissor lift broke down on the entrance of the parking lot. And then the technocrane operator for our shot was stuck behind the scissor lift. And they didn't call anyone. This is they had a pre-call, but they didn't call anyone. They just stuck there and waited till call time to say, we broke down in the entrance of the parking lot. So now
my gosh.
Charlie Sharon comes to me and says, look, we're now 2 hours behind schedule. We got to get the scissor lift out of the way and then get the technocrane and then build the technocrane. Oh. They had a pre-call 2 hours earlier, but they missed it basically. So we didn't shoot that shot till closer to noon, and now I've got this raccoon-eyed, high dead shot. Plus, as we rise up and look straight down on the pool, there's a crane arm
shot, potentially.
over a corner of the shot that visual effects had to paint out. It actually crosses the body of one of the water ballet people, which is unfortunate. But she managed to fix it, but I was quite just frustrated through that whole
My guess it's one of those things that nobody sees it but you, but I know what you mean.
And it was it's not a perfect move because you run it again to physics. The physics is that if technocrane shot works because the camera is perfectly balanced with the crane. But when a camera goes underwater, the camera goes from weighing X amount of weight to having negative, having buoyancy basically. Yeah. So it wants to float upwards. So you can weight the crane for the underwater portion, or you can weight the crane for the above water portion, but you can't do either.
You got to fight it at some point,
so
right?
We balanced the crane to make it front heavy, and then we put a crossbar at the end of the arm so the two grips could grab it and physically hold the camera underwater.
Oh, I gotcha.
And then let go and let it pop out of the water. Then we had issues with water dripping over the lens as we looked straight down, and we tried putting an air hose next to the filter, but then the air hose would actually drip in front of the camera lens, so that didn't work. So we took that off. We ended up just putting Rain-X over the filter. Every take we'd apply more Rain-X to try to get it to run off quickly. But because it was in full sun and Amy wanted a certain amount of depth of field, I was getting the droplets, when they did form, would be in focus.
Oh, boy.
And then because the camera had to rise straight up on one side of the pool and come straight down on a right angle side of the pool, you couldn't normally, for those sort of perfect moves, you want the base to be lined up so you don't have to try to do a straight up and down move on a swing, just go up and down with the arm.
Yeah.
But we're rising on one end and then coming down on the other end, so we had to put the base at the corner to do those two positions. So we're trying to do a straight move but on a diagonal.
On a diagonal, yeah.
And then when we end up looking straight down, suddenly you have no horizon line, and you're trying to look at these water ballet people doing this pattern like a Busby Berkeley show.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you start to lower down, and as you start to lower down, you see the horizon again, and you might be unlevel.
You don't know if you're on or off.
Until it comes in the frame. We start to come down, and I'd say, our horizon's completely off level. So we can't rotate the head when you're looking straight down because
you don't know where you're going.
That's your horizon when you're coming up and down. So, and having Jake or our dolly grip hit a mark 50 feet up in the air, like he's flying the camera full extension on the Technocrane looking straight down, so he's trying to hit a mark for the lens that's way in the air,
quickly too, as I recall. Yeah.
So he's looking way in the sky trying to see if, based
against
on
what?
his arm and his base and everything, that he's over the center of the pool. Because as soon as we're off center and we start trying to adjust on the wheels, that's when we'd be screwed coming down again.
So, it's amazing to hear all this, because for anybody who's listening who's never been in this situation, it just shows you this stuff just doesn't happen.
Right. And we come down and we land fast, and if we're side to side off an inch, we're not landing on midge. Midge is suddenly too far right or too far left.
She's coming, as I recall, she's coming to frame so quickly that there's no time to adjust, really.
Right.
It's just
you've got to
hope and hope that you're there.
So it was a very difficult shot. And this is one of the reasons why sometimes I'll push to try to do it, not that shot, but when it's a choice between a step off and on a Steadicam off a crane platform versus a disconnect on a Movi and a Technocrane, I'd rather do it with the step off the Steadicam, because Amy likes to adjust the shot by talking to the operators. And when you do those Movi Technocrane shots, you've got a Movi operator, you've got the Movi operator at the wheels, you've got the Technocrane arm operator, you've got the guy swinging the arm, you've got if
Yeah.
it's moving on a track, you've got
Sure.
dolly grip. So you've got several people all in coordination with each other just to make one compounded move.
Yeah.
Um,
So she's still going to talk to the operator, but then the
Right.
operator has to disseminate that to all the people.
Right. And
as
when you're
opposed to
talking
just-
about dealing with dance,
Yep.
it's much easier when it's one person. So if it's a Steadicam operator who can adjust every take to what the dancer is doing
Yeah.
instead of two people on headsets or something. So you've seen with Movi shots sometimes you can see this back panning issue because you're moving around side to side a lot, and you've got a Movi operator panning the camera back and forth, and you got a person on the wheels trying to compensate for that, and you end up with this fishtailing kind
Yep.
of effect.
Yep.
So that's why I prefer Steadicam when I can do it. And we did Steadicam. There's a shot in season 4 where the camera flies up onto a stage during a two-level. It's called Femininity.
Oh, in the burlesque
House. The camera
which is amazing.
sees this two-level set of these dancers, and it goes up on stage and goes into one of the rooms. The dancer spins 180 degrees, rises to the second floor.
It's incredible.
Tracks
Yeah.
across the second floor, comes down again, goes into the bottom room, spins 180 degrees around those dancers, and backs up and lands wide again.
I actually didn't realize that was Steadicam. I assumed it probably wasn't because it doesn't look like there's enough room in there.
Yeah, I know. That was my concern is
yeah.
there enough room inside that space?
Yeah.
And it ended up being, a fairly wide angle lens. But we talked about steady technocrane with a Movi disconnect and all that. But the problem with the crane is that if I put a crane in the audience, then 1/3 of the audience is now missing, and visual effects has to paint that
Paint 'em up.
audience
Yep,
in.
yep.
So, we built a ramp so Jim could walk physically up onto the stage and then walk into that room and then step backwards onto a crane platform, be lifted, and then tracked across
Oh, I
the
see.
backside of the set.
Okay.
And Charlie Sharon our key grip had to chainsaw part of the backstage set to make room for the weight bucket at the start of the shot. But at the end of the shot, we're at the now the weight bucket is actually in the shot behind the dancer's head, so visual effects had to paint out the crane at that point and the track on the floor.
It's funny because I remember watching that and going, "Where's the crane?" and thinking there must be some VFX in here because there's no way it could get in and out that quickly.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's still an amazing shot, and I'll post it on the podcast page so people can see it.
The only visual effects was at the very end, the crane base was visible in the backstage
and you had to
behind
take
the
it out.
actors.
Amazing. So you've done like the Polish Brothers movies seem like the complete opposite of what Maisel is from a camera movement point of view.
Yeah, when I did Twin Falls, Idaho, which was only like a 16-day feature,
Really?
Michael had said, I don't want the camera to move at all.
I was going to say that's my impression of it,
Yeah.
as I recall.
And so my challenge was sort of the opposite, was how do I make a series of very static frames interesting? And so I watched a lot of Gordon Willis films because I feel like Gordon Willis is sort of the master of the static frame that has so much dramatic power in the way it's framed.
Yep.
That you just feel the weight of the shot. There's something about the light and the shapes and the sizes of things that give it a kind of dramatic intensity, and it's very static. So I kind of modeled that film on The Godfather and those sort of films.
It's a beautiful film. For people who are sort of coming up as operators, is there a Gordon Willis movie or a couple Gordon Willis movies that you would suggest watching for that? I mean, besides Godfather. Godfather, of course, and 2.
Yeah, well, I think The Parallax View is like a great film to look at for composition, especially for CinemaScope, anamorphic Panavision composition.
Yep.
Because it's such a film about sort of existential dread and paranoia and isolation. It's very modernist in its framing because it's so wide. So you've got characters way off to one side of the frame.
Yeah.
Very, very off-centered compositions and very oppressive kind of architectural elements around the characters. So it's a very striking film just for framing. And I think it even carries into his other widescreen films he did in anamorphic with Manhattan, but also Comes a Horseman and Paper Chase, which is an odd film for an anamorphic to choose anamorphic, but he uses negative space quite a lot in that.
I'll have to watch
film.
that again. I remember seeing it years ago, but I don't really recall it, to be honest. But I'll have to watch it again.
Yeah.
But because you're a huge cinephile, I know this from looking at your Facebook page. Do you have an Instagram account too?
Yes.
Okay, I'll post them at the end of this because anyone who wants to see some of the best Well, first of all, you tend to pull stuff from old movies, which is just cool to look at. But your photography is absolutely unbelievable
Thank you.
on those pages. How? This is a weird question, and it's an odd question to ask, but how often do you? Because the pictures that you put up there just look like they are absolutely perfection, and I'm wondering, are you taking 30 pictures and we're seeing one of them, or do you take a long time and study exactly where you want the camera to be, and take that frame?
It depends if I'm shooting film or digital.
Yeah.
I can't shoot 30 pictures if I'm shooting film, but I do take quite a lot of pictures digital. If I find a good street corner where the framing of a bridge and a building and a door frame is nice, and I just wait for something to happen in front of it.
That's what I wanted to ask you.
I'll click a lot of pictures of people crossing. The other thing I do when I take pictures is sort of a habit of mine. And New York is so crowded and busy, it's very hard to get a clean frame. Sometimes you take advantage, you make a cluttered frame, but other times I'm just waiting for a moment where there's just one person rather than three people or something. But one trick I do also is if something wipes my frame that I'm not expecting, like a bicyclist or a taxi fast, I always hit the trigger because it happens so quickly, I don't know what I'm going to get. And occasionally, because I tend to shoot with short shutter speeds to freeze action, I'll get back and look at it, and I'll have a perfectly composed shot of a bicyclist taking 2/3 of the frame up or something. So I've just made a habit of, rather than cursing that this guy just crossed me right in the last second, I'll always click on anything that blocks my frame for a moment because I just never know until I look at it.
That's great, and explain it, because there are some things where I look at it and I go, how did he possibly grab that? But obviously you're waiting. There's some great stuff that I remember seeing that you did in the subway, like from one platform all the way across the subway to another, of like people sitting on benches and stuff. But it's one of the things that younger operators and people who want to be operators say, well, I'm not working, so what can I do? And I was just say, you've got a camera, go out and find frames that tell stories, because then when you're on set and you have to land a frame, you'll instinctively go to something that you like because you'll kind of already know what that is.
I think it's definitely still photography, and I used to be an artist in terms of drawing and painting, so all that helps understand composition, plus studying movie composition. I find, especially classic movies, sort of like John Ford or Orson Welles, are very well composed films, or Kurosawa. I just study all of that stuff. I think the tricky thing with operating is motion, movement, moving the camera and people moving. And that's where it's hard as a still photographer. Still photography is about freezing motion. Yeah. So in some ways it's an opposite of what cinematography does. Cinematography is about capturing motion. A still photographer creates the illusion of motion in a still frame. A cinematographer doesn't have to create the illusion of motion. The motion is
it's
there.
Sure.
So there's sometimes different things that work differently in the two art forms, but I certainly in terms of framing, the sense of how architecture looks under different focal lengths, and then how people, how big a person is relative to a ceiling or a door frame or a corridor based on the focal length and the distance, you start to get a feeling for the subtleties of that, because it's obvious. When you're making a movie or show, you can do the big obvious stuff with a super wide-angle lens or a super telephoto lens, but a lot of the day-to-day stuff we do, we're just trying to pick between a 35 and a 28 or a 35 and a 40 or a 50, and you start understanding that the sort of compression and expansion you get in those ranges of in-between lenses, the pros and cons of how that affects architecture and people. Yeah. Maisel tends to be a wide-angle show because of all the Steadicam move. It's not because I love wide-angle lenses. Jim does. Jim loves that sort of look. Because it's very immediate and you're kind of up close to all the action. There, I tend to be a little more the Gordon Willis thing. I like the in-between, moderately wide to in-between normal lenses, because it makes less of a statement, and it just things feel more natural in their shapes and sizes, and there's less distortion. So we're always trying to fight between the wide-angle lens look, because we need to circle around a tiny room in a person. I was going to
ask, some of the stuff you couldn't do.
And me trying to back up and get a longer, a slightly longer lens on things, just for how it flatters the actors and things like that. So, but I remember in the Gaslight, we were in the pilot even. I think we set up a shot of Midge and the family at a table, and Amy said it doesn't look crowded enough, and I go, and the room is packed like this, and it's because we're close on a wide angle lens.
Oh,
and I
it's
said, well,
separating.
if I drop back and go to like a 40, and I put the next row of tables in front of them on each side of the frame, you'll feel that they're boxed in by the crowd. So that's often in these crowd scenes we do on Maisel, we get into discussion. Do we want to be, how many layers of foreground do we want to be in? Do we want to be one row in? Do we want to be inside all foreground? Or do we want to have some foreground extras to remind the audience that they're in the middle of a crowd and not in front of a crowd? So that's where the focal length comes into play. And we had a very difficult shot at the Wonder Wheel sequence in season 4.
The Wonder Wheel?
Wonder Wheel in Coney Island.
I remember that. Yeah.
The hard part, the Wonder Wheel part, was difficult just because it was all green screen and everyone's in separate cars, and I had to light it to look. But before they get into the Wonder Wheel, there's a scene in the ticket line at the real Wonder Wheel in Coney Island.
I remember this.
And it's a cattle,
it's like a zigzag
cattle, prod kind of situation, like a lot of pipe rails in a and they're unmovable. We got the location. I said,
because this is at Coney Island.
At Coney Island. I said, can we remove a cross section? No, it's all welded together. It's all one piece. And I said, well, the actors are doing dialogue as they zig up and down this line, and we can't be in the line with them, because then they were literally going to be like a foot, not only a foot in front of their face, but everyone behind, they're stuck behind each other.
Yeah.
So if we're in the row with them,
you can't go anywhere
they're
else.
all stacked to camera lens. So we got to be in the next row over to see them more on a diagonal. But then the trouble is, every time we turn a corner, we spin
Everything
the other way
changes.
around,
Yeah.
and one person starts to be in the next row, and do we have to hop to the next row further? And I said, we got to somehow float over these rails. And then the question again became, are we inside the foreground row of people? If we are, if we start out with them in the shot and they go past us, then they got to get behind the camera. They're stuck also in these rails.
Oh, yeah.
So we kept trying to figure that out. We ended up, I wanted to put the camera on like a technocrane. The trouble was, the real Wonder Wheel is at the end of this line. So behind the lens is the Wonder Wheel. So I can't.
So there's no space.
There's no space to put a crane.
I gotcha.
We ended up doing a short pipe jib arm rig that we sort of swung over the rail guards of the line, and that was sort of hitting the Wonder Wheel at behind camera.
Okay.
And that was as much space as we had to work with. But you watch the scene, you don't think anything of it. We have a few foreground crosses that somehow they
I'll have
managed
to look at it.
They
thinking
managed
of that
to get
again.
between the actors and the lens for a few when they need to be,
Yeah.
and then they kind of disappear for the bulk of the dialogue, and then they come back in again. It looks very simple, but it was very hard to execute. And then the reverse angle on Rachel, she comes on the other side of the rail to talk to her father.
Yeah.
By the time we got to her side, it was night. So I had to light her as if there was still daylight. And I've got this big Wonder Wheel in the way, so I'm using the Wonder Wheel. I think I put a sheet on it and bounced off of it to get some light.
And these are all the things that happen, right?
Yeah, so-
I mean, that's the thing, is you got to constantly be ducking them. Do you work with B camera operator a lot on that show or other shows? Do you tend to work with two cameras a lot?
It depends on the nature of the show. Most television, they want lots of B camera footage.
So-
I'm not a big fan of multiple cameras unless they make sense for performance or shooting action or things like that. I don't like just cramming a second camera in there for the sake of getting one more angle. That's to me kind of lazy directing to some degree. You don't know what you want, but it makes sense for certain types of projects. But it forces you into certain focal lengths and other things. When we do use multiple cameras on our show on Maisel, it tends to be cross coverage because basically Amy's all about performance, so she doesn't like overs. She'd rather do clean singles, which means shooting them one at a time, but sometimes she'll want to get both sides at the same time, and then she has to live with overs because we have to go longer lens.
It's also rapid fire
Yeah.
dialogue quite a bit, which I'm sure she
Right.
wants to capture.
So when we get into those sort of two-person dialogue scenes, I'll ask her, "Do you want to cross cover this?" she'll ask me if that's possible, or if she'll say no, it's not necessary or something. But so that's difficult lighting-wise. But then we bring in the B operator and we cross cover. Sometimes what Amy does do that's fun is that we will, instead of multiple cameras shooting the same thing, we'll leapfrog cameras where we had a 12-page scene in the apartment once where the master is on a Steadicam. They come in the foyer. Midge comes home to get a change of outfit. Her parents meet her in the foyer. They go up and down the hall in the Steadicam. She ducks into one bedroom, and the operator is waiting there to catch her coming into that room. She leaves that room. She ducks into the kitchen. Another camera and operator is waiting for her in the kitchen, and they have a scene in the kitchen. They go back in the hallway, and the Steadicam's waiting for them again and takes them up and down the hallway.
So it's sort of a oneer, but it's not.
Yeah. So we end up covering a 12-page scene in just like...
In no time.
Yeah.
That's great.
It was... so Amy did that to me on the pilot. She had a scene in the office, Joel's office at night, and Joel goes out of the office in the lobby and runs into someone else, and Amy said, can you plant a camera outside the door so when he steps out the door, the bee is waiting for him, and then he does the next scene in front of that camera.
Yeah.
And so we do that quite a bit. So that's when the bee operator really works. Also the other time we use multiple cameras is during the stand-up acts.
Sure.
Because that's covered more like a concert show or something.
Sure. Yeah.
We often bring in a third camera and do a wide and mediums at the same time and move in with the 3 cameras.
So then it sounds like you're not looking for the B camera operator to be like pitching shots. It's more standing by to find out what the next piece that's needed by design is.
Yeah, on Maisel, but I've done other shows, more police procedurals or other type shows where the B operator really has to be looking to contribute and find shots because we need cuts, we need coverage, and I don't always have time to think of what B can be doing. So if B comes to me and says, hey, I could get over here, and I'll say, that's great, or actually what I could use is this, and have them work on
Go find that for me, or whatever.
So it's good when the B operator is thinking.
And is the best thing to do to have Artemis on your phone or something like that, and click a shot, bring it over to you? Is this a value?
Yeah, they've done that. It's funny is that Jim is always looking for shots, so whenever I do have B doing something, Jim's out looking for, and something A camera can do is a B shot, which is just kind of funny. I had a shot I was doing on with B camera because I think we had Jim about to do a Steadicam shot, and then we were leapfrogging, so B had the next setup, which was a tracking shot in a prison set we had built. And while we're, often it's hard enough to do these shots, and I don't really want to run a second camera on a shot with a bunch of glass windows and lights and dealing with that. But Jim, on his own, had found this cool angle. He said, look, if I cram myself into here, I can get a 2-shot with the piece of glass between them, and you can see a double reflection, and you see everyone
those are great.
in this prison. And when he took a picture of it with his phone, and it was such a nice shot, I said, yeah, go for it. Normally I get frustrated. I'm so busy trying to do the shot, but I could see instantly the value of it. And
but he brought it to you, so it wasn't already out there with the director who maybe you can't do.
My concern is just always, well, that angle, the main angle is on the lit side, is favoring where the sun is hitting the actor. Your angle is looking at the backlit side on Alex Borstein, and so my issue is just I don't want to add a light to her just for your B shot.
Yeah.
But luckily, when I saw his photo, I realized that the backlight on Alex, she's facing a glass window pane. So the window and the table is acting as a bounce card back into her face. So even though she's wearing a hat with a brim, she's got plenty of light on her face from the backlight bouncing around. So I could see that it would work anyway. So, we ran it.
That's great. You were talking about older movies and how, they didn't move as much, like Kurosawa and Orson Welles and whatever. And I'm wondering, do you think that older movies had to spend more time figuring out compositions because it was harder to move the camera?
A little bit. I mean, Welles did move the camera quite a bit in his later films.
Sure.
You look at The Trial or Touch of Evil.
Touch of Evil, sure.
On an 18 mil, and there's a lot of handheld stuff too in that film. And
but earlier on, do you think it forced them into those?
I think the size and weight of the blimped cameras and things. They would often put the camera on a crane arm, which created lighting problems, I'm sure. But allowed them to float over furniture and stuff. so they would do simple kind of moves with pullbacks on cranes and stuff, but the kind of elaborate dancing camera moves were less common due to the weight and size. And I do think they thought more about framing, but also I think there's just an aesthetic of the time. Because if you look at amateur photography magazines, or the ASC would run vacation photos of members would take, or their art photography back in the 30s and stuff. They would sort of run our members' photography, and it'd be my trip to Spain, and it'd be some photo of a church, and these compositions were just so classic. It's like a church framed by a foreground oak tree that's arching over the top of the frame, and it's perfectly composed for 4x3. So there was a kind of aesthetic back then that was just everyone had these kind of very classical training, very classical framing of balance and rule of thirds and framing devices and shapes and contrast. And it wasn't until you got into the 60s with handheld and zoom lenses that people were finding these kind of modernist compositions, which are very loose and fluid and turn into frames that are interesting, and then they sort of turn into kind of chaos for a while. So composition, the art has changed over the decades as lenses got longer and cameras got freer to move around. But
do you know who Merrick Morton is? Still photographer. He's a unit still photographer He's an incredible still photographer. I'll send you a link to his stuff. But I worked with Merrick on Widows, and he showed me, and I may be getting the story wrong, but he found out that the LAPD was going to get rid of all of their old crime photos. And he had seen some of these before for some reason, and somehow he convinced them to turn them over to him and some group or whatever and turn them into a show, because these photos were essentially what film noir was because they had these amazing photographers who were filming these crime scenes. And you can look at some of them online. I'll send you the link and I'll post it with the podcast. But it's the same kind of thing. It's like you had these bizarrely beautiful artistic photos of bodies in the street and car accidents and whatever, but it was a different time. No question about it.
They had very sort of classical aesthetic sensibilities, and it was important that they follow these kind of rules of framing. So they tend to be well composed in a classical sense, and I think it's good to learn that style. In terms of weighting the frame and all this
That's
sort of
exactly
thing.
what all this is. And you look at it and you just go, these are, this could be a movie right here. And it's real life. It's really incredible.
That's, again, where street photography or taking pictures sort of helps you learn to walk around and look for shapes and frame things for color or contrast or size of objects or other things like that.
And there's no cost to it now, so it's a free way to do it. I couldn't end without saying that one of the things that I really enjoy are your pictures of your dog, because not only are they great pictures, but she has
hound,
just
Clara.
Such an unbelievable personality in every single picture. They're fantastic. So
I can't get a good picture of her eating because she is such a voracious eater. I would need like a phantom camera running at 1,000 frames
to
per
look
second.
at her, what is she, a basset hound?
Yeah.
To look at her, she doesn't look like she does anything fast, but I guess maybe that's the
Eating
one thing.
is fast.
That's very funny.
She'll snatch food very quickly, consume it very quickly.
Thank you so much for this. This was like such a pleasure in hearing all these stories, and there's so many good things that you brought up in here that I think are important. I'd like to leave you with the question that I leave everybody with, which is someone trying to get into the film industry, someone trying to jump up to become an operator, or even David Mullen now talking to David Mullen when you started out. Do you have any advice for how to succeed in this business?
I don't know. I've never been very good at career advice because I've never felt myself to be a good salesperson for myself. So my attitude in film school and after was always, well, I'm not any good at selling myself. I'm not great at job interviews. I just better be very good at what I do. So I studied a lot and practiced a lot and figured that when I got a shot and I would just prove through sheer effort that I could pull off these shots or do these sort of things. So part of me was just be prepared for the opportunities. We all get opportunities at weird times when we may or may not complete 100% comfortable and ready to make that leap, but we can't wait for the perfect moment. We might have to take a chance and do something that's risky or a little bigger than we thought we could do, but we sort of not faking it, but prepared for it. So you just have to be prepared and keep yourself in training and for those opportunities, and then take advantage when they do happen. The landscape has changed a lot for beginner cinematographers because digital has allowed people to own their own camera packages. When I was in film school and afterwards, there's always the question, do I become an owner-operator with a Super 16 package, or do I just stick to renting? And I never bought equipment. I just was always a renter, so which has allowed me to just shoot in 35 millimeter. I had a lot of friends in the same position, but they owned 16 cameras, so they were doing 16 features because they had to use, rent out their camera gear. And so I was never held ransom to my own finding work for my equipment kind of thing. But that was in the 1990s. Now, I think a lot of producers expect a person to own a camera. So that's a big decision, what to own and when to move on to the next camera, and who to maybe coordinate with another person to go in on something together. It's become a lot more common now for someone to buy a Komodo or Sony EX3 or something, just to keep up and have something that they can sell themselves with. So that's a different world. I'm not sure, how to advise someone on that. But I think it's just a constant process of preparation. You also have to learn the politics of working with crews and working with directors and producers, being a people person, so to speak. It's not my skill necessarily, but I try to be mindful of that. I can get overly focused while working, which means I don't talk a lot. I'm too busy thinking how am I going to move the camera 360 degrees and light a close-up at the same time. But I have to try to remember to talk more and to the directors and say hi to the cast in the morning and just be a pleasant person to work with. Because if you're too off on your own, you get the reputation, he's not a very nice person. It's not that, or, I'm being unintentionally rude because I'm overly thoughtful at that moment. But so I try to be mindful of that. But it is a industry of collaboration. And it's not an industry for people who don't like people. You have to work with people and learn to work with people and work well with them that they want to work with you again the next time. It's no good to do a great job and then be unhireable after that because everyone says, well, the show looked great, but I'm never going to work with that guy again. So you do have to learn to work with people and talk to people nicely. And I think... in the long run, just make your life better, I think.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. We'll be back soon with another great episode. Don't forget to check us out on theop.io for all sorts of information on operating and storytelling. So thanks for listening and have a great day.